All right, welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Strickland coming at you again, and I want to remind you this is the second video, not the first. So if you are coming in to this one initially, please go back, start at the beginning. I really want you to watch these in order because each one kind of builds on the last one. And in the last video, we talked about posture and biomechanics. And I had mentioned how the way that we use our muscles, even when we're just standing around, can have an impact on whether or not we cause damage and degeneration, not just to them, but also to the joints. So that's what we're talking about today. We're going to be talking about our muscles. How do they work? How do they get bigger? How do they stay the same size? How do they get wasted away, smaller? We're going to talk about all of that. Before we get started, I just want to remind you my book is available on Amazon, and I do recommend getting it. The information in the book is presented a little bit differently than these videos, and that is on purpose because I really want to make sure that everything I talk about here, you understand it, because it's going to go against a lot of the things you thought were correct about how we move and how we should be exercising. And if you do have Kindle Unlimited, you can read that book for free through the description down below, so go check that out, please. Contrarian point number one right now. This is going to go against a lot of what most people are going to have in their brains about muscles. Each one of your muscles has one job, one role, one thing that it's really, really good at. Now, I understand that most muscles can do many different things, and this is absolutely true. But usually when we talk about muscles and what they do, you're given the components of what they're good at, which is, it makes sense because it needs to be able to do those things to do its job. But don't get confused by all of the noise. Every muscle in your body was built to do one thing. And what's great is because it was designed for that one job. No matter what you do, if you have that muscle and it can fire, is going to do that job, which is great. And that's important to understand because every time your muscle fires and does something, it's going to break, even something this simple. No question, every single time. And that's not a bad thing because it does come into healing. It relates to what we were talking about earlier, potentially getting bigger, staying the same, or getting smaller. Now, I shouldn't say everybody, but most people understand how exercise works. You go, you pick up a weight that's heavy, and you do this a bunch of times. You tear that muscle down, and that muscle tearing apart, all of those tears are signals to the brain to let your body know that you are using this muscle. You're asking it to do more than what you have before, and it's taking more damage than it should. With exercise, what that does then is it indicates that the body needs to make the muscle actually get bigger, get tougher, be able to sustain that level of damage. But this is also important to just maintaining our muscles where they are. If we're not breaking our muscles down, how does the body know to keep the muscles the same size? And the reason for that is because what happens if you don't do anything? If you go on bed rest, or if you know anybody who ever has, one of the things that comes up almost right away is they start to lose their muscles. They start to lose their strength. Well, because they're not using the muscles, they're not breaking them, so they're not indicating to the body to keep the muscles put together and healthy to do that job again. And instead, the body decides to cannibalize it to use those resources elsewhere. So every time your muscle fires, it breaks. Now, when it breaks, it sends out this inflammatory signal that goes up to the brain to let the body know that the damage occurred. And this is important because that's going to set up that muscle to get healed, but not right away. Now, it's really during the day when you're awake, you're shifting, you're moving, you're fidgeting, you're doing a lot more than you think. You're kind of in constant motion, which means you're constantly breaking down. You're not able to really put anything back together. You're not able to really start healing while you're awake. You have to wait until you go to sleep. Your body will paralyze you for 8 hours and give you some time to actually start putting these things back together without all the breaking happen from all the movement that you're doing. Now, for most people, what that means, typical cycle is 16 hours a day you're awake and you're breaking down, and you have to repair all of that in 8 hours. So that's a problem because that's not a lot of time to consider your whole body and how we're going to heal that whole thing. And further, you have to understand that healing isn't just something that happens for free. There is a cost tag to that, and that cost tag is usually calories and protein and all that nonsense. But again, we're not going to be going into specifics here. I want to give you the basic idea. So, the way that I see it happening is essentially you move your muscle, it breaks. It sends that inflammatory signal up to your brain to let your brain know that the break occurred. And then the brain essentially gathers materials and gets ready to heal. It indicates that it needs to start collecting its resources. So I like to think of it as your body has this bowl. And every time you move a muscle and it breaks, that signal comes to the brain and your body starts to fill that bowl so that when you go to sleep, the resources are already together. They're already prepared. And all it has to do is then give it out to everything. Now, we're going to watch a little video here in a second, but I want you to think about that for just a moment. Your body has this bowl of healing energy in 8 hours to repair your whole body that you broke down over 16 hours. How does it even begin to do this? Well, again, your body understands that every single muscle has a job to do. And based on what I can only assume is just really, really genius, crazy level math. Your brain knows what a muscle should take in damage by doing its function that day. So if it knows that there's a muscle that should take 100 damage, it's going to then ration out from this bowl 100 healing to that muscle. And then it does that for every single muscle you have because we have to make this process as simple as possible. So if muscles are only doing what they should, then everything should be okay. There should be no problem because it did its job. The body knows that it should take X amount of damage doing that job, so it's going to get that healing when you go to sleep. So let's visualize this process really quick. I made a quick little video and I had a lot of fun doing it, so I do want to show that. So again, your finger breaks because you moved it. Now that signals the brain to say that the break happened, and the body goes, okay, we need to heal it. We gotta wait until we go to sleep, but we do need to start preparing the resources, and this is happening all over your body. So you got that bowl, and every time you move and you break, all of a sudden, it fills with a little bit of that energy, and then a little bit more. And it keeps filling that bowl based on your motions, and the bigger the motion, the more stuff that goes in the bowl until it's the end of the day, you're ready to go to sleep, and now you can start to ration this out. You have the whole body. You have 8 hours. Well, whatever muscle, you're supposed to take 2 damage. Here's 2 healing. Here's 2 to you. Here's 4 to you, and etc., etc., etc. It just dumps all of its healing all over the place based on the muscle's function. Under ideal circumstances, everything is put back together and we're ready to go the next day. But this is where we need to understand what it is that's actually breaking, because this is going to get even more complicated than that. Now, an insanely basic look at muscle structure, you're going to see that there are layers and layers and layers to our muscles. So you have your muscle, let's say this one right here. And if you were to take that off and rip it apart like a coconut and look inside, you would see that it's got all these little circles, all these little strands. You could pull one of those out. Now, there's hundreds to thousands of these strands. These are fibers, really thin little fibers. And if you were to look then under a microscope at the fiber, you would see that it's basically just a very long chain. And those little components of the chain are called myofibrils. And again, you have hundreds to thousands of these myofibrils within each one of your chains. And then if you were to look at just the myofibril, you would see that that is made up of chains of sarcomeres. And that's what you see on the screen right now. That wonderful handmade drawing is a sarcomere. You can see how it basically looks like this, and you can see how they interact and intertwine with everything in a series, a big long series in that tubular structure. And they're deep, and there's ones behind and in front. They're kind of all over the place. And if you look at it, you can see how that middle bar there has a bunch of these little hairs that come out. They actually act a lot like an old Greek row ship. You know, you would see the old videos, and there's the guy on the drum, and everybody's heave ho, and they're all trying to work together. That's how all of these sarcomeres work. That is the smallest component of the muscle, the smallest contractile tissue you have are these sarcomeres. So they're going back and forth, and every time you do, a couple of them, they break. That's okay. That's really good because we want to heal them. We want them to stay strong. So that's not a problem. But let's take a look at volume here because it's actually insane. We're going to just give with very basic numbers. We're going to go with one of the smallest muscles you could possibly have. And we're going to go with the smallest numbers. So you have a muscle that has 100 fibers. And each one of those fibers has 100 myofibrils. So that means that this muscle has 10,000 myofibrils. Now, if we take the smallest number, basically like 1,000 sarcomeres per myofibril, we come up with 10 million. So if you think about this, if you have 10 million sarcomeres that do this, 10 million of those little boat rowers, and you break 2 every time that happens, it's not really a big deal. You could do that 10,000 times. That's only 20,000 damage or so, maybe 30. You do a little bit more than that, but it's out of 10 million. You're not doing a significant level of damage to yourself. In fact, again, your body expects that muscle to take some damage over the course of the day because it's got a job to do. It needs to be firing and doing this, and that's how it goes and does its healing. The problem comes in when we don't understand that muscles have one job, and when we don't encourage the muscles to only do their one job. Essentially, let's think of a muscle, and let's say that this muscle's main job is to hold that bone in place when we're standing. It's just supposed to hold the bone up so that we remain upright. And it's expected to do that job, and it's going to take 100 damage if it does. If we don't keep that bone lined up so the gravity is going through the bone like we talked about earlier, and all of a sudden it's going through the muscle instead, now that muscle is doing a job that it wasn't designed for. So now it's not taking 100 damage because it's not good at what you're asking it to do. It's going to take more like 500. And now is the problem. That right there is the biggest issue. Because if you think about it, that muscle's supposed to take 100 damage. It's now taking 500. When you go to sleep, the body gives it its 100. And that's just not enough. It can't put itself back together. And I can always go deeper into this. And the book does go deeper into this to kind of, there's a couple of issues with this that some people might be able to bring up. Get the book, read the book. It goes over that. But what that means is you're left with 400 damage in that muscle that isn't put back together. And now, you know, the body has taken all of its resources, given it out to all the muscles, and you're about to wake up because you're out of time. And there's still this damage there. Now, remember what I was talking about. Remember that picture. They're all lined up in a series. They're all linked in this long line. They just like a rope. If a rope is frayed, you're not going to use it anymore because if you try to use it again, it's just going to fray a little bit faster because it's weaker. It can't sustain the strain. So it's going to break down until eventually it snaps. And luckily, your brain understands this about your muscles. So what it's going to do to make sure you don't wake up like this is it's going to tighten that muscle before you wake up until those little ends that are frayed meet. And as soon as they do, they're going to grab each other and they're going to create essentially a muscle knot or an adhesion. Now, people argue that adhesions, muscle knots, they're different things. I really don't care. Whichever word you want to use is totally fine in my book. So the end result is instead of looking like this and actually functioning, it looks like this. And now it's doing nothing. So not only has it gotten shorter, but it's also lost that 1 unit. In this case, 400 units. It's lost strength and range of motion. This is not okay. This is going to be a very serious problem, and we'll go over that as we go through the muscles for sure. But because of that, it gives us the two problems that we have. Muscles used incorrectly leads to excessive damage, and that excessive damage then leads to the muscles getting shorter and knotted or adhered and losing their strength functionally. And I believe that this is actually where osteoarthritis comes from. Unless you have some sort of traumatic joint damage from when you were a youth or something like that, and you just don't know why you have it, it's because those muscles have been shortening up over time, putting tons of strain on the joints on either side of that muscle, which leads to the vice-like compression of the connective tissues, and we'll probably talk about that at some point. But essentially, once those connective tissues, those separation tissues, I should say, that are between the joints, once they wear out and the bones meet, osteoarthritis. Not a good thing. Now, there are two solutions, and you need to do both of these solutions. And the way that I've always told my patients that I treat, the philosophy that I have is the parable of the fish. If you give somebody a fish, they're going to eat for the day. If you teach them to fish, then they're going to eat forever. We need to understand that we have to get rid of the knots, but we also have to make sure that we correct the issue that led to them in the first place. And pretty much every single time, in the absence of significant trauma, it's because we are misusing our muscles because we just don't understand what they're actually for. So that's where we're going to go next. We're going to now break it down into individual muscles and talk about what their main job is, what we have asked them to do up to this point, and what we need to do to correct it. And then we will talk about techniques with each one of these different areas to start helping get rid of those muscle knots and all of that kind of stuff. So I hope that you made it this far. Again, I really do appreciate it. And if you want to support me, please go down and get a copy of my book. I don't care how you do it. Leave a like, a comment, subscribe. It would be awesome. Ask questions. I do plan on doing videos to address some of the major questions that are coming up consistently. But this is where I'm going to leave you. I've been Dr. Strickland. Thank you very much. And I will be speaking with you again very soon.